I bought my first home at 27. After years of saving, I finally managed to get a place of my own. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a small, humble house, but I was proud of it. Adjusting to living there took some time. I'd grown up with my parents, 3 siblings, and a couple of dogs. That house had always been lively, full of noise and constant movement, but now it was silent, eerily silent. That silence was the hardest part to get used to. Being alone felt unnatural, and I honestly wasn't sure if I'd ever feel comfortable with it. I imagine anyone who's made the leap from a full house to solitude knows exactly what I mean. One thing I really liked about the house was a tiny balcony attached to the second floor. Though calling it a balcony is probably generous, it barely had room to stand. No way I could squeeze a chair out there. Still, I found myself stepping out most evenings after work, using it as a little mental reset. I smoked fairly regularly, but couldn't stand the lingering smell indoors, so the balcony was perfect. I didn't have to leave the house entirely, but I still had fresh air. It felt like a small comfort I didn't know I needed. Let me explain the setup of the neighborhood so the next part makes sense. I lived on a typical suburban block, houses in rows, one right next to the other. Directly behind mine was another line of homes, identical in layout. If not for the tall 10-foot fences separating the yards, it would have looked like one giant shared space. From my balcony, I had a clear view over the fence and into the backyard behind mine. I could see everything in that yard. After settling in, I met most of the neighbors, except for whoever lived directly behind me. Now that I thought about it, I hadn't seen that person once. No introductions, no waves, no one tending the yard, no movement through the windows, nothing. It felt like the place was empty. The only hint that someone might have lived there was the bedroom light flicking on occasionally at night. I figured it might be an elderly resident. The grass hadn't been trimmed in ages, and the yard was dead silent. No dogs barking, no kids playing. After a while, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to drop by and say hello, just to know who lived back there. One Saturday, I walked the long way around the block to reach the front of the house. I intended to knock, maybe exchange pleasantries. But once I saw it up close, I realized the place looked bad. Really bad. The lawn was a jungle of weeds. Paint peeled off the walls. Some of the siding was scratched or missing. The concrete walkway was blotched and grimy. The doorbell didn't work, so I knocked loudly a few times and waited. No answer. I began to feel awkward just standing there and started to assume no one lived there after all. But just before I turned to leave, I caught a twitch in the curtain. A brief, subtle shift, like someone was peeking out. That confirmed it. Someone was inside, watching, but refusing to come to the door. I had just pivoted away when the front door suddenly burst open, slamming back against the wall like it had been flung with force. Startled, I turned and found myself staring at an elderly Asian woman standing stiffly in the doorway. She was petite, with gray hair drawn into a tight bun. Her face was deeply lined, yet the skin seemed taut, almost as though she were straining every muscle in it. Her wide, unblinking eyes gave me a sense of unease. I'd be lying if I said she didn't unsettle me. Something about her was just wrong. She looked like she might have been under the influence of something. She said nothing, just stood there, gazing at me blankly. After a few seconds, I cleared my throat and introduced myself as the new neighbor. She eventually responded, telling me her name was Priscilla and offered a faint, strained smile. That was the extent of our conversation. She never asked my name. She kept watching me in silence. Not knowing what else to do, I nodded and turned to leave. I felt uncomfortable, though I didn't want to admit it to myself. I never heard her shut the door behind me, and I didn't dare glance back to check. That evening, I returned to the balcony like usual, hoping to shrug off the bizarre interaction. I had no idea that I was about to get dragged into something much stranger. I leaned on the railing, and there she was, the same woman standing motionless in the middle of her backyard, staring directly at my house. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there. It was one of those moments where you question your own perception. Am I really seeing this? I wasn't sure if I should acknowledge her or pretend I hadn't noticed. It was deeply unsettling, and I didn't know how to respond. Eventually, I went back inside and tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just a bit off mentally. Nothing to be afraid of. But things didn't stop there. The next night, I spotted her again. This time, moving between windows in her house, keeping her eyes fixed on me through each one. Even though I acted like I hadn't noticed, I was sure she knew I was aware of her watching. She didn't let up. She was still at the window when I stubbed out my cigarette and went back inside. Out of pure nervousness, I peeked through my blinds about 20 minutes later. She was still watching. I phoned my dad. He said she probably had dementia or was simply lonely. He suggested that I try to feel sorry for her. It was hard to feel pity when someone seemed to be actively spying on me, but my dad's words calmed me a bit. Maybe he was right. A few nights passed, with no incidents. I didn't see her in the yard or by any of her windows. I started to think my dad had been right all along, and I felt relieved I hadn't overreacted. Until one morning, when I spotted a single woman's sock lying in my backyard, right next to the fence. I froze. That meant she had been on my property. This had gone beyond strange behavior. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to escalate things, but I couldn't pretend this was normal anymore. I should have called the cops, but I didn't. I was still trying to avoid conflict. That night, as I lay in bed, the doorbell started going off. Not once, not twice. Over and over, again and again. I didn't have to check. I knew it was her. Half asleep and irritated, I got up, pulled on her shirt, and marched to the door. I told myself I'd finally ask her to leave me alone. I'd avoided confrontation long enough. Looking back, I can't believe how recklessly I approached the situation. I hate to say I was naive, but that's the truth. The second I opened the door, she lunged. She came at me full force, holding a kitchen knife. Her face was twisted with fury, and she screamed something about me stealing her son. I barely had time to react. I grabbed her arm and wrestled the knife from her hand, then forced her to the ground. She wasn't hard to subdue, but that didn't make it any less horrifying. My heart pounded in my chest as I pinned her down and called the police. She kept shrieking incoherently, saying she was going to kill me. She even tried to bite me at one point. I held her there until the cops arrived, hands shaking the entire time. Those 5 minutes felt like an eternity. She never stopped flailing or screaming. When officers got there, they restrained her and shoved her into the back of a cruiser. She screamed the whole time. I could still hear her as they drove off. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. The officers checked on me and told me she'd be transferred to a psychiatric facility. I never saw her again. Even now, the memory hangs heavy in my mind. I've become more cautious, more paranoid because of it. I ended up moving out before the year was even over,